Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, helping higher education marketing leaders share knowledge about learning, strategies, and tactics that are relevant today. See what you can learn today by listening to one of our episodes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, hosted by Concept 3D. My name is Shiro, and I will be your host today. And today, we will cover another episode of our accessibility mini-series, and we will be talking about how to influence change through community. And for our guest speaker, I'm really excited. We have Terrill Thompson. He's currently serving as the manager of the IT accessibility team at the University of Washington. Welcome to the podcast, Terrill.
Thanks, Shiro. It's good to be here.
Great. And I do love asking this one icebreaker for all of our guests here. What do you love about higher ed?
I've always loved higher ed. As a student, I think I have always wanted to stay in that environment. I never really wanted to graduate. And when I did, then, I pretty quickly, and I spent a few years outside of higher ed, but always wanted to get back. I've always lived in college towns, and I've always loved just being part of, the exciting things that happen, particularly in a research university where they're doing just a lot of research. The landscaping, the architecture, the athletics, it all sort of contributes to this vibrant culture that I just really enjoy being part of.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Terrill, could you tell us a little bit about, your background, what you're doing now, some of your roles and your goals as your department?
Yeah, well, I'm at the University of Washington, and I've been here for over 20 years now. In the central IT organization, we have a department called Accessible Technology Services, and the part of that I am most involved with is specifically working with the University of Washington and their IT, which encompasses everything digital with user interface, so software, websites, web applications, digital documents, videos, anything that has a user interface has the potential to either break down barriers or create barriers for certain groups of users. And so our team is responsible for trying to get the university to ensure that all of its technology is accessible. So that obviously is a large ask for a small team, 5 people that I supervise, plus a few part-timers and some students. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of, digital accessibility assets or digital assets that need to be accessible. So mostly we spend our time consulting and doing trainings and developing resources and providing support, and generally just trying to build community around accessibility and getting people to understand the idea that if they create something or they purchase something, they deploy something and make it available for users, they are responsible for ensuring that's accessible. And so, we're here to help, and we're glad to be a resource, and, would love to help in any way that we can. But ultimately, they own the accessibility of whatever technology they're responsible for. And so that's where creating culture really is essential, and just kind of empowering the existing infrastructure to support accessibility.
Love to hear it. And I know how long have you been, building this community around accessibility, this community and culture?
Well, I started at the UW in 2001. So again, it's been just over 20 years. And prior to that, I was at North Carolina State University doing the same thing, and also working nationally. And so a lot of us who are in this space, for many institutions, it's just a one-person shop. One person is responsible for technology accessibility, and they can't do it alone. And so the community, it can be defined in a lot of different ways, but working nationally or even globally. Through organizations like ATHEN, the Access Technology Higher Education Network, or EDUCAUSE, the Association for Higher Education Technology, High Ed Web. All of these organizations play a key role in sort of building community independently of particular institutions. But then, within our institution, community is important as well. And so definitely, at the UW, ever since I started, on day one, it was all about, building community around accessibility and getting people to own and buy into the need for accessibility.
I love it. Thanks so much. And I know there were two key elements that you created when, you started at UW, and that's around building groups within the internal community within UW. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've accomplished there?
Yeah, one of the things I talk about a lot, because it's so easy to replicate, and that is a mailman list. We just created, and I actually don't get credit for this. It happened before I arrived, but
Nice.
there was somebody, the webmaster, their actual working title was webmaster, but somebody within the central IT organization who created websites, had an interest in accessibility, and there were other people across campus who were developing websites and had an interest in accessibility. And so that person created an email discussion list using Mailman, and that then created this initial seed for a community to develop around accessibility, and more people signed on to that. I've kind of lost track of how many people are on that list today, but it still exists, and I think there are well over 200. Mostly web designers, developers, people who are involved in some way, and websites at the UW. And what started as a mailman list, just people asking questions. I've got this design that I'm working on, and I'm curious what you all think of its accessibility. Can you have a look at it, and providing each other with feedback. That evolved into meeting once a month over lunch to talk about web accessibility stuff, and that evolved into having guest speakers, and it just became kind of more and more formal. And what we do today within that community is have still a monthly meetup. We call it the monthly Web Accessibility and Usability Meetup, but it is for people to bring their challenging, maybe even not so challenging, but bring something they're working on and share it with others, and others can have some an opportunity to provide some feedback on the accessibility or the usability, and usually there's an opportunity there for everybody. There usually are some newcomers that don't know anything about accessibility. They're just getting started, and so it's a friendly setting to learn. But there are also people who have been doing this for years, and they really have developed some pretty good accessibility skills, but they're working on this really challenging design, and it's not obvious. How do I make this accessible? There are no sort of standards for this particular thing that I'm creating. And it's an opportunity to get input from the community, on some possible approaches. So we actually have this meeting tomorrow or Thursday, this week, and I'm really excited. We got a couple of really good designs that are going to be, bringing, or individuals that are bringing their interesting challenges to that meeting, and so I'm always looking forward to this. One of my favorite things that we do every month.
That's awesome. And what's the group consist of mostly? Is it web developers and similar like web management positions, or is it kind of a gambit of different titles and responsibilities?
It's quite a variety. The people that come consistently, I think, are mostly sort of in the web design, web development, UX world,
Mm-hmm.
and so, but it does, there's a pretty broad mix, and it actually attracts some outsiders too. And we are open to outsiders coming. We have people come from other universities, and we have some of the vendors that we have collaborated with, because it's a big part of what we do is work with the vendors with whom we do business to help them be more accessible. And a lot of our vendors have really come to value that relationship, and they too, are active participants in this meetup. So it's really interesting to tap into all the different perspectives. Great place to get challenges solved, or creative ideas circulating.
That's fantastic. I actually just had a conversation on this very topic and mentioned your name, that this is something that you've been doing, over a decade or so to someone who I'm hosting a webinar with about creating a roadmap to digital accessibility, and she's just starting to build this group and liaison within her school to kind of build the same community that you've also created at UW. So that's amazing. Second point of this was, I know a little more specific. I know you were talking about in our introduction call, you created an IT specific accessibility liaison group as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and maybe how it's also different from the first dedicated group you created or that you have at UW?
Yeah, that too is a key piece of our community building efforts, and I'd say those two kind of go hand in hand. That the first one is critical because it's so easy to set up, just in a mailman list, and obviously you need somebody to kind of seed the discussion maybe and get that, conversation happening. The other is important because not just web accessibility, it's more broad than that. We're specifically interested in technology accessibility, so it is still a little bit limited in that we're just talking about technology, but we as a small department in a very large, very decentralized university, we have always needed people out there in the trenches to sort of help us bring the accessibility message to departments. And so, over the years, we've identified kind of key allies, people that we've collaborated with, people that have reached out to us, and we formed these relationships. And so a few years ago, we decided to kind of formalize that and created the IT Accessibility Liaisons Network. So it's all those people out there in the trenches who have emerged as having an interest in accessibility and being willing to sort of take on accessibility within their scope of influence. Might not necessarily be part of their job description. For some it is, and for some it has evolved to where it's part of what they're doing officially. But others, it's just something they care about, something they're passionate about, and something they're willing to put some time into learning more about, and then trying to pass that on and educate the people around them. So we've been doing this for many years now. Kind of the format at the moment is once again we have a mailman list. So there is that where we can communicate with them and they can communicate with each other. We also have 3 half-day trainings, workshops, meetings per year. And so we get together for a half a day, and really it's a deep dive. So beyond, what we might cover in a typical, 1-hour webinar or something like that, we can really dig more deeply into a particular topic of interest and usually, we'll reach out to them to find out what the timely topics are, and get them to weigh in on what the agenda might be for the next meeting. And then we also tap into that network too if we're doing special projects and wanting to evaluate accessibility products or testing things, various things that they can get involved with. And so that's always our first stop if we want to engage people and just tap into people who are interested in accessibility to kind of help us out with various things.
That's amazing. And so the second group, is the audience like a little more broad then? And I know you mentioned the first group is mostly some sort of web-related role, but is the second one more across departments and more varying titles? Like you said, it could be not part of their job description, but also just something they're interested in.
Yeah, and it really is a wide variety. There's some overlap that some of the same web designers and developers are part of the liaisons group, but they're also just a lot. Far more than I could even rattle off, but it's people in a lot of different roles, management roles to sort of grassroots technical roles, and all across the university. I wouldn't say every department is represented, but a lot of academic departments, a lot of administrative units, the med school. There's representation. It's a pretty good cross section of the university that's represented, and it's growing all the time. Can't remember if I gave a number yet, but over 150. I've lost track, but somewhere 150 to 160 right now members within that network.
That's amazing. So several hundred people, it looks like, between your two 2 dedicated groups. That's a huge number. I'm wondering, with all these members and so many constituents involved and being more responsible, has the bar been risen for the average person, average faculty, in their knowledge of accessibility or digital accessibility, because of the help of these things? I'd love to hear a little bit more about what the results have been like for the institution.
Yeah, that's a good question. Does essentially, when I guess paraphrasing, and maybe putting words in your mouth, but have we reached that point where it's not cool to be inaccessible? And this kind of a bit of peer pressure, that is sort of forcing people to consider accessibility. And I wouldn't say we've reached that yet. 150 employees out of several thousand is still, a pretty small number. But that is really sort of what we're shooting for, that accessibility becomes the norm, rather than, just something extra that people do because they have to. And that really, it comes down to cultural change, changing the culture. So it is a culture that embraces accessibility at the level where every time we create something, we always take the steps necessary to make sure that it's accessible. Or procure, same thing in procurement, that whenever we're going to, buy some software, we're always going to check, do due diligence to make sure that we're not going to be introducing barriers by buying this and deploying it.
No, I appreciate you putting that into plain words, right? How are you measuring this? Are there some kind of, aside from just the sheer number of members you have between the two groups, are there some other kind of things you've noticed in your tenure there, about some changes that have been made or some small wins that you can grasp on?
Well, I do feel like we are making progress. I mean, every day we encounter somebody who still hasn't heard the message. They've been at the university for as long as I have or longer, and they still, accessibility is not on their radar yet. And so, but by and large, I would have to say, it feels like, I don't have objective data to measure this, but it feels like we're making progress. That, when we talk to people about accessibility, it's not deer in the headlights anymore. And it's not, new to them. It's moving beyond new and into very specific things. Like I mentioned with the meetup group, often it's a design pattern that is only a challenge because it hasn't been done before. So the stuff that has been done before and that's common on websites, people have already figured out, what's the best practice for how to code this properly, so that it is accessible and works for somebody, who's using assistive technology or just using a keyboard or whatever. Those design patterns are pretty well established. And so, so there's already quite a bit of expertise there, but, it's, thinking creatively about new and, including accessibility and innovation, where I feel like we are, seeing progress. That accessibility comes up a lot more frequently in those sorts of conversations. And, going back to procurement, because that is a big part of what we do, because, we are, evolving into a university that buys first as opposed to builds first. And therefore accessibility needs to be, included in the conversation when we're buying something. And we're more and more frequently invited to the table to, to help review products or, to, just have that accessibility voice, at the table when they're negotiating contracts and, all that kind of stuff. Whereas before, we really had to be aggressive in trying to get ourselves to the table. And now we're invited to the table, frequently enough that, we can hardly keep up with the demand. So that's a good thing.
Do you mind explaining what you mean by a buy first instead of build first, just for the audience?
Yeah, well, that's, in a university where you got a lot of IT talent, you got programmers, developers who are capable of building something, and you have a need, like, for example, email, back in the early days of the internet, there's a need for people to send messages back and forth using email. And in those days, the University of Washington decided, how are we going to solve this problem? We're going to build an email client. And so we built Pine. And that, for many years, was the email client that most people were using at the University of Washington. And it was widespread. A lot of people were using that. Mm-hmm. And we built our own course management system. So whereas today we use Canvas primarily, and a lot of institutions use Canvas or Blackboard, products like that. We built our own initially. And so there is that decision point, do we build our own and then have a team that, does design and development and support, or is it just more cost effective to buy something that's already available and, have a smaller team that supports that, but rely on the vendor to do our thing.
Thanks for explaining that a lot. It helps. I think the audience understand what you meant. Do you think that the industry as a whole, higher ed industry, from a IT perspective, are they moving more towards that model of buying first? The second part to that question is, do you think that's better for the ally or accessibility community as a whole, like to put the responsibility into those vendors' hands? Do you think that'll move things forward faster?
That's a great question, and I don't know that I can speak for the overall higher education landscape. Uh-huh. I do, at least in I think most colleges and universities, just my own observations, I do think that as a whole it's moving towards buy rather than build. Uh-huh. But there may be large research universities like our own where they haven't started moving in that direction yet. But just from my perspective, that seems to be the trend. But as far as is it better for accessibility? I'm gonna have to say not necessarily, because it's a lot easier to reach out to the in-house team if there are accessibility problems and say, hey, here's an accessibility problem, can you fix it? And they will fix it. That's been our experience with the internal products that we've developed and maintained. Much easier to get them to change. Whereas with a vendor, we are at the mercy of the vendor, and we try to get accessibility built into contracts. We are pretty unique at the University of Washington in that we collaborate extensively with vendors and help them to understand our perspective and point out where problems lie and try to help them prioritize. And some vendors are really receptive to that, and we've got really close working relationships. But we're still at the mercy of them to prioritize those changes and, build those changes into their product. And we can't just get it done like we could when things were built in-house. But on the other hand, if it's a vendor product, they've got a lot of different customers. It's not just us. And the more all of their customers talk about accessibility, which is happening more and more, I see this, in my engagement, like with EDUCAUSE and other national groups. More universities are talking about accessibility and have policies in place that require accessibility and are demanding accessibility from their vendors. And so I think the needle is moving a little bit, and having a vendor solution that is fully accessible, or that, where that vendor has bought into accessibility, then that can definitely be a plus. But we're still not at that point yet. I think, most of the products that we work with still have accessibility problems, and we still need to work with them to help them, both understand and prioritize accessibility to the point where we're not excluding anybody, who wants to use those products or needs to use those products.
Love it. Thank you so much. I had a kind of question sitting in the back of my mind about your liaison group as well. I'm a marketer, right? So I work within marketing. I have been my whole life, and I'm curious how many marketing folks are a part of that group, right? Because they're responsible for making social posts and other marketing assets, maybe in collaboration with other web UX people about making things accessible on the web and on digital. Yeah. how's their involvement in those groups?
That's a good question, and I don't have a number off the top of my head. But
Yeah,
but we work closely with the central marketing team, University Marketing Communications,
that's great.
and they're really a key partner because they manage the homepage and all of the themes and kind of standard widgets that they're encouraging people to use, and they develop sort of core PowerPoint templates that are on brand, and so they play really a critical role in accessibility, and are highly visible. They're sort of the front face of the university, so they're a
Right.
key partner. There's another organization I haven't mentioned yet, which is the IT Accessibility Task Force, and that is a higher level group that was formed many years ago. Reports directly to two VP level individuals, and it was originally formed with my boss, the director of Accessible Technology Services, and the director of web services within University Marketing Communication as the co-chairs. And so it's always been a partnership between those two groups, technology accessibility and marketing. So they, from the beginning of that group, were a key partner in all this. And the task force has expanded to include many groups who are are key stakeholders in making sure things are accessible. But marketing has always been kind of at the front seat of the table, and a key partner in all the work that we do.
Love to hear it. Yeah, one thing I'm trying to drive home with this mini series and some of the content we're creating in house here at Concept 3D is leading with accessibility, not just following, and so marketing the options you have for physical accommodations on campus. Marketing that, not just having it there, but marketing it, saying like, hey, we have these resources. Same for digital, right? Showcasing your efforts to it, creating accessibility statements page, but going beyond that and showing how and your dedication to it. And making those pages easy to find on the website, quite frankly, as well, making it sure that you can find it. And so that's one of the key things we're trying to lead with as well. So I love that. It sounds like at the UW, there's a lot of efforts with marketing, which is really cool to hear. Kind of along the same topic here, marketing tools and different things we talked about in our intro call. One thing we talked about with tools and making sure they're accessible is with maps. I was talking about maps with you, and you said, I said that they're just kind of a visual tool, so they probably accessibility isn't a strong component of it. But you said, hey, wait up, it's not just a visual tool. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and this actually going back to your question of buy versus build, the campus maps is a good example of that, where we need a campus map, right? That was the decision point, and we decided to build one. That's what we have done historically. So we always had our own, campus map that we've maintained ourselves. And now we're at kind of a crossroads where we're revisiting that, and now we're looking to buy. And I don't know whether we have officially signed a contract with Concept 3D or not, so I can't really speak to that. But that is the direction we're headed is having a commercial solution to provide our campus map. And so what is a campus map? What function does it serve? There was a day where if you're standing in the middle of a college campus and there's no driving, right? So it's, pedestrian traffic. You've got your map that you have unfolded, that unwieldy thing that's blowing in the wind.
It's this big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out, where am I and how do I get to where I want to get? And using a traditional map, some people are skilled at map reading. And they, so they could do that. They could figure out, from an aerial view where they are and where they need to get. Not everybody has that skill. Some people have no eyesight at all, and so they're not going to be using that map. But even people that do have eyesight aren't, have, spatial challenges or whatever, and they can't translate what they're seeing on this piece of paper to the world around them. And maybe they don't want to get anywhere. They just want to know, what is this building I'm standing in front of? and what is it for, and what is its history, because it's a really cool building, and I just want to know more about, when was it built, and so there are lots of reasons why somebody would consult a campus map, and a digital campus map just opens up so many possibilities where I can very easily get information about that building in front of me, and it's not a visual thing necessarily. It's all the facts about that building and which departments are located within that building. And I can get directions, and applications like Google Maps, have really sort of revolutionized this, where I'm a pedestrian. I want to get from where I am to this other building, across campus. What's the best route for me to take to get there? And that doesn't have to be presented visually with a line that draws on this map, how to get there, but it can be step by step. And again, Google, and other, mapping applications provide that kind of thing. So that the applications are broad, for a lot of different groups of users, who just need to know something about their environment. And so presenting that in a visual way for people that benefit from that is great, but also presenting it using lists and headings and just kind of standard HTML makes a lot of sense too. And I would also add to that wayfinding application that people have different needs in terms of how they're going to get from point A to point B. So I'm a wheelchair user. I want to get from building A to building B, and I can only travel on accessible paths. I can't use stairs, and I want to go from the accessible exit of building A to the accessible entrance of building B. And so a mapping solution that takes all of that into consideration, really just opens up the the universe of map usage to a full spectrum of users.
I love that. And, thanks for bringing that up, because it's something I wasn't thinking of initially before, right? Especially what you said about just overall usage, right? The ease of use is an accessible element too that I wasn't thinking of. And when you said that literally 3 minutes ago, I was thinking of myself like at, I don't know, maybe like an amusement park or a huge park, right? And you see the map kiosks, and there's maybe like a little "you are here" sign, right? Which helps identify your location. But that little thing may be so hard to find sometimes. And I've spent time looking for that at, various locations. And it's so cool to like be able to know where you are, how you're spatially connected to things in your environment. So I love that you pointed that out. It's kind of like, it reminded me of the alt text in the caption conversation, right? It's like, you don't need to be deaf to need captions, right? It makes understanding of the information easier for everyone. And that's why I think there's a statistic that Gen Z, like more Gen Z folks use captions now than previously, because it's not labeled as just an accessibility tool anymore, right? It's a tool to make understanding easier. And so I thought that kind of like made me connect the dots between maps and closed captioning. I don't know why, but I appreciate that you pointed that out.
Well, I think the connection is universal design. We talk a lot about, and I'll, it's maybe a little bit cliche, but things like curb cuts, that were originally designed, for people who are using wheelchairs, to get up onto the sidewalk. But now, anybody who has a load, pushing a cart, pulling a cart, a baby stroller, riding a skateboard, for better or worse, maybe using those ramps, those curb cuts, and then automatic door openers is another great example, where I often find myself in a position I've got my hands full and I can't grab the door handle, just being able to bump that button with an elbow and have the door open. It's designed for accessibility, but it benefits everybody. And I think, there are just so many examples of that. And, the examples in the digital space are, growing by leaps and bounds. And I think a campus map certainly would fall into that, the more accessibility features you build into your product, the more people are going to use those features, not just people with disabilities, but everybody's going to find some usefulness for those features.
I love that. I love that you said that. I use one of those buttons every time to the automatic door openers to get my bike inside my office building, because otherwise without it, I don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
no, it helps me out. Appreciate that. And I was wondering, so, where can our audience connect with you to learn more about what you're doing? I know you have a ton of speaking engagements all throughout the year, and you're very involved with a lot of communities. So love to know where our audience can connect with you and maybe ask some questions if they'd like.
Yeah, well, the best place to learn about what we're up to as a whole is our accessible technology website, which is uw.edu/accesstech, ACCESSTECH. For me personally, if you wanted to reach out, then my email is my initials, TFT, Tango Foxtrot Tango, at uw.edu. And so, if people have questions about IT accessibility in a university, then, I'm happy to chat.
Amazing. And I know you mentioned some groups earlier that have been instrumental in, learning more and building community outside of just your institution. Do you mind sharing those again? I know High Ed Web is one you mentioned, which I love as well.
Yeah, High Ed Web. It's great for web designers, developers, anybody who does web work in higher education. Educause is more broad. It's IT in higher education, but there's an IT accessibility community group within Educause that I am active with, and they're people in higher education in IT roles who are looking at doing what they do in an accessible way. And then the other was ATHEN, the Access Technology Higher Education Network, which is people in roles like myself, primarily people who are charged with accessibility in some fashion, technology accessibility within a higher education landscape. So the website for ATHEN is athenpro.org.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Terrill. It's been an awesome conversation. It's so glad to have you on. And thanks for our audience for joining and tuning in as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you.